Mafia boss hears his black maid singing at night. When he enters, he uncovers a secret that shocks him. The mansion was silent that night, the kind of silence that settles over a place where power sleeps with one eye open. The hour was past midnight, long after the security team had completed their final rounds and the household staff had retreated to their small rooms on the lower floor. Dominic Castellano, the man the city whispered about, the man whose name alone could halt conversations in crowded restaurants, was making his way through the darkened West Wing. He was on his way to his private study, unable to sleep as memories from earlier meetings churned inside him like stormwater trapped beneath ice. But halfway down the hall, he stopped. A sound floated through the air, soft at first, so gentle he wondered if he imagined it. A woman's voice, not speaking, singing. The note lingered, trembling like a thread of warm light. It was a song he had never heard before, yet it carried something familiar, something that pulled on a long-forgotten part of him. Dominic's breath tightened. No one should have been awake at that hour. No one should have been in that hallway. And no one, absolutely no one, ever sang in his house. He followed the sound, each step slow, careful, guided by instinct more than intention. The voice grew clearer, spilling from a small laundry room at the end of the hall. The melody was tender, woven with sorrow so deep it felt ancient, like something carried across oceans and generations. It rose, fell, and folded into itself with a longing that made his chest ache. The singer did not know she had an audience. She sang the way a person speaks to their own heart when no one else is listening. Dominic paused outside the slightly open door. He could see the faint glow of a dim bulb casting a warm circle on the tiled floor. Inside, a figure knelt beside a folded pile of freshly cleaned linens. Her back was small, her shoulders tense and tired, her hands gently smoothing the cloth as though it were something fragile. It was Naomi, the quiet maid from the South Wing. The maid who barely spoke. The maid who kept her head down. The maid who had worked in his home for only a few weeks, but managed to move through the mansion like a soft shadow. But her voice was not a shadow. It was pain. It was memory. It was something that did not belong in a place built on marble, steel, and guarded secrets. Dominic pushed the door open slowly, his hand steady though his pulse was not. And in that moment, just before she realized he was standing there, he knew without understanding why that whatever she was about to reveal would change something inside him forever. Naomi froze the instant she sensed movement behind her. The last note of her song broke in the air, thinning into silence as she turned her head slightly, just enough to see the tall shadow filling the doorway. Her hands stopped mid-motion over the folded linens, and for a heartbeat the entire room felt suspended, as if even the dim light above them paused to listen. Dominic Castellano stepped fully into the room, and the air changed. His presence always altered the atmosphere in any space he entered. But here, in this small laundry room with its faint scent of detergent and warm cloth, the contrast was sharper. Power standing inside a space meant for the quiet, invisible parts of life. Naomi rose slowly to her feet, smoothing her worn uniform, trying to control the tremble she could feel starting at the base of her spine. She avoided his gaze at first, looking down at her shoes, then at the folded sheet on the counter. She clasped her fingers tightly together, willing them not to shake. She had seen him many times from a distance, but never this close, never at an hour when no one else was around, never when she was caught doing something she had never intended for anyone to hear. Dominic did not speak right away. He studied her with that deep, unreadable stare of his, the one that made even seasoned men fall silent. But there was something different in his eyes now. Something that was not coldness or control. Something softer. Something searching. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. I did not know anyone was still awake. Naomi swallowed, then answered with a quiet tone. I apologize, sir. I did not mean to disturb anyone. I was just finishing the last load before I went to sleep. Dominic stepped closer, his polished shoes soundless on the tile. You were singing. Naomi's breath caught, and she looked down again. Yes, sir. Just a habit. I did not think anyone would hear me. Dominic paused, as if choosing his words with unusual care. That song. I have never heard it before. Naomi hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the open doorway as though she considered escaping, but her feet stayed rooted in place. It is an old melody, sir. My mother used to sing it. It helps me stay calm when the night feels too long. Dominic noticed the slight quiver in her voice and the way she held her arms close to her body, as if protecting something fragile inside. For the first time, he really looked at her. Not as a member of the staff. Not as just another quiet figure moving through his hallways. But as a woman carrying a weight he could not yet see. He observed the tiredness around her eyes, the faint redness suggesting she had cried recently, the tension in her shoulders that spoke of long days and even longer nights. How long have you been working here, Naomi? A few weeks, sir. Almost 1 month. And you work the night shift? Yes, sir. Usually until after midnight. Dominic glanced at the clock on the wall. The hour was well past that. He looked back at her. Why are you still awake? She hesitated. I had one last basket to finish. And sometimes it is easier to keep working than to try sleeping when my mind is busy. Dominic understood that feeling more than he would ever admit aloud. He waited, sensing there was more she was not saying. Naomi took a small breath, then added, the nights are quiet here, sir. Too quiet sometimes. Singing helps me feel less alone. The ache in her words was not loud, but it was unmistakable, and something in Dominic's chest shifted. He had built his world on silence, on control, on the kind of order that left no room for softness. Yet here she was, using a simple melody to survive the same silence he had created. He stepped closer, his voice quieter. Your singing is not a disturbance. It is different, unexpected. She finally looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting both worry and exhaustion. I am sorry if it was inappropriate, sir. I can stop. Dominic shook his head once. No, do not apologize for that. Naomi watched him, unsure what to say, unsure why he had stayed, why he had not simply reprimanded her and left. Dominic's gaze dropped to her hands, still clasped tightly together. He softened his tone further. Naomi, why does that song sound like grief when you sing it? Her breath hitched, and she looked down sharply, blinking rapidly, as if trying to stop something from surfacing. She opened her mouth, then closed it. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. Because it is grief, sir. Dominic felt the room grow still again, the weight of her words settling between them like dust on untouched furniture. He did not know the story yet, but he knew enough to realize that her song had not been just a melody. It had been a memory. And whatever memory she carried was about to reveal a truth he was not prepared for, a truth that would pull him deeper into her world than he had ever stepped before. The silence in the small laundry room deepened after Naomi's last words, a silence so complete it felt as if the mansion itself paused to listen. Dominic Castellano remained still, his posture rigid yet uncertain, as though he was navigating unfamiliar territory. Grief was something he recognized, something he had learned to bury under layers of control, but hearing it inside the voice of a woman who spent her nights folding sheets and scrubbing the corners no one else cared to see stirred a part of him that had been untouched for many years. He stepped back slightly, giving Naomi room, not wanting to crowd her as she fought to steady her breathing. Her hands, still clasped in front of her, tightened until her knuckles trembled. Dominic watched closely, the dim bulb above casting a warm halo over her face, highlighting the exhaustion she carried like a second skin. Naomi, he said slowly, what happened? The way he asked the question was not a command. It was not the authoritative tone that made grown men step aside and guards stiffen. It was quieter, restrained, as if he was asking something he had no right to know. Naomi lifted her gaze, and for the first time since he had entered the room, she allowed him to truly see her. Her eyes were dark and glossy, holding a depth that told him the answer would not be simple. Sir, she began, her voice low, I did not come here because I needed a job. I came because I needed distance from everything I left behind. Dominic felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest. He had heard similar words from people trying to run from their enemies, from their debts, from their past, but Naomi's tone held none of that. Her voice carried something softer, something that felt more like heartbreak. She continued, I have worked many jobs before this one, but this place, the quiet nights, they are the only time I can breathe without feeling the weight of the world pressing on my chest. I thought working alone at night would help me hold myself together. Dominic listened, sensing this was only the beginning. He moved to lean lightly against the doorframe, giving her space while making it clear he was staying. Naomi drew a slow breath, then spoke again. The song you heard is one my mother used to sing when life became difficult. She taught it to me when I was very young. It has a way of making the darkness feel less heavy. She paused, then added with a faint tremor, I have been singing it more often since I arrived here. Dominic studied her face, noticing how her expression shifted as memories surfaced. He kept his voice even. Why? What made you come here in the first place? Naomi hesitated. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, twisting the fabric with a nervousness that did not match the calm tone she tried to maintain. I had a brother, sir, she said finally. He was younger than me. He used to laugh all the time, used to think the world was full of possibilities. But life was not kind to him. She swallowed hard, and the tremble in her voice returned. There were many hardships, and when things got worse, I left home to try to earn enough to help him. But I was too late. Dominic felt a shift inside himself, a tightening he did not expect. He knew the weight of being too late. He knew what it meant to carry regret like a shadow. Naomi continued, her voice softer. After I lost him, everything felt loud and unbearable. So I took this night job. I thought keeping my hands busy and my voice quiet would help me feel like I was still moving forward. The song reminds me of him. It helps me remember the parts that were good. Dominic absorbed her words, the pieces fitting together like fragments of a story he had not been prepared to hear. He glanced around the laundry room, seeing it differently now. The folded linens, the small pile of clothes waiting for the dryer, the faintly humming machines. This was not just a workspace. For her, it had become a sanctuary, a place where she sang to heal a wound no one else could see. Naomi exhaled unsteadily. I never meant for anyone to hear me. Singing feels like the only way I can make the night gentler. Dominic let a quiet breath escape his chest. He had heard many kinds of pain in his lifetime, but this was different. This was quiet pain, honest pain, the kind that asked for nothing yet lingered in every corner of a person's life. He stepped forward again, only a small distance, enough that his voice reached her without the echo of the hallway. Naomi, he said, you do not have to hide that part of yourself here. His voice did not rise, but the sincerity in it carried weight. Naomi's eyes widened slightly, unsure whether to believe him. She had expected reprimand, maybe even punishment, but not this. Dominic held her gaze. I am not concerned with a maid singing at night. I am concerned when I hear a song filled with sadness from someone who works under my roof and thinks she has no one to turn to. The words surprised Naomi. They surprised Dominic himself. But they were true. And in that moment, in the quiet of that small laundry room, surrounded by folded linens and soft light, something unspoken shifted between them, something neither of them fully understood yet, but both of them felt. And Dominic knew, without knowing why, that this was only the beginning of a truth he had never expected to uncover. Dominic remained in the doorway for a long moment after Naomi finished speaking, as if the weight of her confession settled over him like a quiet snowfall. The laundry room felt smaller now, not because of the walls but because of the truth that had filled the space. Naomi stood very still, her hands folded in front of her, her shoulders drawn inward, as if she expected that revealing even a part of her heart might bring consequences she was not ready to face. Dominic had spent his life in rooms where secrets were currency, where truth was dangerous, where emotion was a liability. But the truth she had given him was different. It was fragile, honest, unprotected, nothing like the sharpened confessions he heard from the men who came into his office hoping to escape punishment. He stepped a little farther into the room, and Naomi instinctively stepped back, her spine brushing lightly against the counter behind her. He stopped immediately, not wanting to startle her. His voice lowered, the edge softened. Naomi, he said, you do not have to explain more than you want to. Her gaze lifted slowly. Her eyes searched his face, looking for any trace of judgment or impatience, the kinds of reactions she had learned to expect in the world outside these walls. But Dominic's expression remained calm, almost contemplative, as if he was trying to understand something beyond her words. She drew a breath, then released it shakily. I know I should not bring personal feelings into the workplace, she said quietly, but sometimes the memories catch up to me. Singing helps me remember him without falling apart. Dominic nodded, absorbing each word. He thought of the countless nights he had stood alone in his study, staring out at the dark city skyline, trying to silence memories he never spoke aloud. He thought of the things he carried, the burdens placed on him by blood and legacy, the ones he could never escape. For a moment, he saw a reflection of his own hidden life in the way she held herself, in the softness she tried to suppress, in the ache she tried to carry alone. The silence between them returned, but this time it was not tense. It felt like a pause where something unspoken was forming. Dominic broke that silence gently. "How long have you been carrying that grief, Naomi?" She hesitated. "Ever since I lost him," she whispered. "And each night, when the world becomes quiet, it finds me again." Dominic felt something tighten deep inside his chest, something he had not allowed himself to feel for years. He glanced at the folded linens, then at the faint glow of the single bulb overhead. This room was not meant for meaningful conversations or deep confessions. Yet here they were, standing in a place meant for chores and finding the pieces of themselves that the outside world never cared to see. Naomi looked away for a moment, her eyes drifting to the open door that led back into the hallway. "I know I should keep my head down and do my work. I do not want to cause trouble. I only wanted a place where my pain felt small enough that I could breathe." Her voice cracked on the last word. Dominic took in a slow breath, steady and deliberate. "You are not causing trouble," he said firmly. "This house is full of people who walk like ghosts, people who speak only when necessary, who pretend they have no past before they came here. But I am not blind. I know every person under this roof has a story, and yours is not a burden." It took Naomi a moment to absorb his words. When she finally met his eyes again, her gaze was full of questions, disbelief, and something close to relief. Dominic continued, his tone carrying an unfamiliar gentleness. "I did not expect to hear a voice like yours in this house. I did not expect it to feel like someone had opened a window where the air had been still for a long time." Naomi's breath trembled softly, and she blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the tears she refused to shed in front of anyone. "I sing because I have nothing else that brings me comfort," she admitted quietly. "It is the only part of home I have left." Dominic exhaled slowly, his voice growing softer still. "Then do not hide it. Not from me. Not from this house." Naomi stared at him, stunned. She was used to disappearing, used to being an invisible part of every room she entered. And now this man, the one everyone feared, was not asking her to be silent. He was telling her she did not need to be. And in the small, warm light of that laundry room, with shadows stretching across the floor and her song still lingering in the walls, Naomi realized something unexpected. For the first time since she arrived at the mansion, she did not feel alone. Naomi stood in the center of the small laundry room, the soft hum of the machines surrounding her like a fragile cocoon. The warmth from the overhead bulb cast a gentle glow across her face, but nothing could soften the tension tightening her shoulders. Dominic's presence still filled the room, not with intimidation, but with a weight she did not know how to hold. His words lingered in the air, unexpected, startling, almost too kind for a house built on power and silence. Naomi lowered her gaze to her hands, noticing how they trembled despite her attempt to keep them still. She clasped them together tightly, hoping the pressure would hide the shaking. Dominic watched her carefully, noticing every small detail, from the way her breath caught to the subtle way she shifted her weight, as if preparing herself for something painful. "Naomi," he said quietly, "tell me what makes the nights the hardest." His tone was gentle, but it carried an undercurrent of insistence, not the force of authority, but the pull of genuine concern. Naomi hesitated, her eyes drifting toward the open doorway again, as though checking that the mansion's long, dark hallways had not suddenly grown ears. When she spoke, her voice was nearly a whisper. "It is the quiet, sir. The quiet has a way of bringing everything back. Every memory, every moment I wish I could forget." Dominic remained still, allowing her to find her words at her own pace. He had learned long ago that silence could make a person reveal more than pressure ever could. Naomi drew in a shaky breath. "After my brother passed, the world felt loud all day long. People talked around me, but I could not hear them." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if steadying herself against a wave rising inside her. "But at night, the world went quiet, and the quiet felt like it was swallowing me whole." Dominic felt something shift inside his chest. He recognized that feeling too well, the way silence could become an echo chamber of memories. He had lived through nights like that, nights where sleep felt impossible because the darkness carried the weight of everything left unsaid. Naomi opened her eyes again, her voice barely above a murmur. When I came here for the night shift, I thought maybe it would help. I thought being busy when the world was quiet would keep me from drowning in all the memories. But the quiet follows me here too. And sometimes it feels even heavier. She lifted one hand, pressing it lightly against her chest, as though trying to contain something inside. That is why I sing. It is the only way I can breathe when the quiet gets too big. Her honesty struck Dominic with unexpected force. He had spent his life surrounded by men who hid behind anger, violence, and false confidence. But Naomi's openness carried more strength than any of their bravado. Dominic took one slow breath. He spoke gently, but his voice felt heavier than before. Naomi, there is nothing wrong with finding a way to survive the quiet. Her eyes widened slightly, surprised at his understanding. She did not speak, but Dominic sensed the unspoken question. Why was he being kind to her? Dominic stepped a little closer, keeping his voice steady. You carry pain, but you also carry something else. Strength. More than you realize. The way you stand here, the way you still show up every night, the way you sing even when it hurts. That is strength. Naomi's breath faltered, and she blinked several times, trying to keep her balance as the emotions beneath her ribs threatened to break through. No one has ever said that to me, she whispered. Not once. Dominic felt a quiet anger rise in him, not at her, but at every person who had failed to see her humanity. He looked around the small room again, taking in the baskets, the folded towels, the hum of the machines. This room had been her refuge, her hiding place, the only place she allowed herself to feel anything at all. But Dominic also sensed something deeper lingering beneath her words, something she had not yet spoken aloud. Naomi, he said, his voice lower now, there is more behind that song, is there not? Her breath caught again, sharper this time, and she instinctively took a small step back, pressing her palms against the counter behind her. He watched the way her eyes flickered, the way her throat moved as she swallowed hard. Something in her expression shifted, revealing a fear she had been disguising with sadness. She whispered, barely audible, Sir, there are things I have never told anyone. Dominic's pulse tightened. He did not move closer, but his presence seemed to anchor her in place. And in that moment, under the soft flicker of the laundry room light, Naomi realized that the quiet of the night was no longer her greatest fear. The truth she was hiding was. And Dominic understood, with a certainty he could not explain, that whatever she was about to reveal would pull him deeper into her world than he had ever intended to go. Dominic's question hung in the air like a quiet challenge, and Naomi felt her pulse thrum painfully at the base of her throat. The laundry room, once her safest corner of the mansion, now felt too small to hold the truth she had guarded for so long. She pressed her palms harder against the counter behind her, grounding herself against the cool surface. The soft hum of the machines suddenly sounded distant, as if the world outside that room was fading away, leaving only her, Dominic, and the weight of everything she had tried to forget. Dominic did not move from where he stood, but his presence filled the room as powerfully as if he had stepped closer. His gaze remained steady, patient, waiting, not demanding. He had questioned hundreds of people in his life, extracted information in ways both gentle and ruthless, but this was different. He sensed he needed to tread carefully, not because Naomi was dangerous, but because whatever she was holding inside was as delicate as glass. Naomi swallowed hard, gathering air like someone preparing to step into cold water. Sir, she said softly, her voice trembling, I have kept many things to myself because I did not think anyone would want to hear them. Dominic shook his head once. I am listening. The words were simple, but something in the way he said them made Naomi's chest tighten. She closed her eyes briefly before opening them, choosing her next words with painful care. When I came here, I did not tell anyone the real reason I left home, she whispered. I said it was because I needed work, that I needed a fresh start, but that is only part of the truth. Dominic watched her, his expression unreadable but attentive. Naomi took a small breath and continued. After my brother passed, I moved in with a relative for a while, someone who promised to help me. But things became difficult there too. She hesitated, then clasped her hands together tightly, forcing them to remain still. People can be cruel in quiet ways, she said. They can make you feel like a burden even when you are trying your best to survive. Dominic understood that more deeply than he wanted to admit. He had seen cruelty in all its forms, but the subtle kind, the kind wrapped in false kindness and empty promises, was often the most damaging. Naomi continued, her voice strained. I took this job because I wanted to be somewhere no one knew me, somewhere no one expected anything from me. I thought the nights would give me space to breathe. I thought being invisible would protect me from being hurt again. Dominic felt a flicker of anger rise inside him, controlled but sharp, aimed not at Naomi, but at whoever had made her feel small enough to run into the night and hide behind folded linens and whispered songs. Naomi's voice softened even further. But the quiet here, the silence of these long hallways, it has a way of uncovering every memory I tried to bury. And sometimes when I sing, I feel like I am trying to hold on to the pieces of myself that I have left. She lowered her head, her hair falling gently across her cheek. I never meant for anyone to hear me tonight. I did not think anyone would care. Dominic's jaw tightened at that, a tiny movement, but unmistakable. He took a slow breath, letting her words settle before he spoke. Naomi, he said quietly, his voice deeper now, I heard your song because it was impossible not to. It was not noise. It was a cry someone should have answered long ago. Naomi looked up, startled by the conviction in his tone. She had expected indifference or perhaps dismissal, but not this. Dominic's eyes held something unfamiliar, something softened by understanding rather than power. You should not have had to carry all of that alone, he said. Not then. Not now. Naomi's breath trembled, and for a fleeting second, she looked like she might collapse under the weight of everything he had just given her, not in pressure, but in relief. Dominic took one careful step closer, not enough to overwhelm her, but enough to make his voice reach her more gently. If you have more to tell, tell me when you are ready. But do not think you need to hide your grief behind songs and late nights. Not here. Not under my roof. Naomi stared at him, stunned by the sincerity in his words, her heart pounding with confusion and something dangerously close to gratitude. And in that moment, under the warm glow of a single bulb, with folded linens at her back and the quiet night pressing at the door, Naomi realized that the man everyone feared had just given her something she never expected. Permission to be seen. Naomi stood frozen, her breath caught in a quiet stutter as Dominic's words echoed inside her chest. Permission to be seen. The phrase unsettled something deep within her, something she had kept locked away for far too long. She lowered her gaze, trying to steady herself, but the emotion swelling beneath her ribs was too large, too raw to contain. The small laundry room felt impossibly silent, the hum of the machines now little more than a distant vibration. She had never expected him to stay this long. She had never expected him to listen at all. Being heard had always come with consequences in her past, consequences that taught her to keep her voice small and her presence even smaller. Yet Dominic was still there, standing inches away, his posture firm, but his expression softened in a way she had never imagined possible from a man like him. Naomi opened her mouth as if to respond, then closed it again. Her throat tightened, her vision blurrier than she wanted to admit. She lifted a hand as if to wipe her cheek, but her fingers froze midway when she felt warmth gathering beneath her eyes. She inhaled sharply, embarrassed. I am sorry, sir. I should not be emotional in front of you. Dominic's jaw flexed, and he shook his head once, slow and deliberate. Do not apologize for being human. Naomi let out a trembling exhale, her hand finally dropping back to her side. She did not know why his words hit her so deeply, but they did. All her life, she had been told to hold herself together, to keep her emotions tidy and out of sight, to survive by shrinking. Now, faced with a man who commanded entire rooms with a single look, she realized that his permission felt heavier and safer than any comfort she had ever received before. Dominic studied her quietly, watching the storm building behind her eyes. He could see the way she fought to maintain her composure, the way she swallowed back everything she wanted to say. The weight inside him grew heavier, not with frustration, but with something unfamiliar, something protective. He took a step closer, but slowly, giving her enough time to move away if she wished. She did not. Naomi, he said, his voice steady but lower now. If there is more behind this grief, you will break yourself trying to carry it alone. Her lips pressed together, and her breath shuddered out of her. She looked away, her eyes drifting to the folded linens as though hoping they might hold her together. "I do not want to be a burden," she whispered. "You are not a burden." The firmness in Dominic's tone startled her, pulling her gaze back to him. He continued, choosing his words with care. "People who see their own pain as a burden are usually the ones who have carried far too much for far too long." Naomi's breath hitched again, her throat tightening painfully. It felt as if every wall she had built over the years was starting to crack under the weight of someone finally seeing her. She turned slightly, her shoulder brushing against the counter as she tried to steady herself. Dominic watched the movement, noticing the slight tremble in her arms. He took another slow step closer, his voice gentler now. "Naomi, look at me." Her head lifted almost reluctantly, her eyes glossy, her breath uneven. Dominic held her gaze, steady and grounded. "You said you left home because things became difficult. You said people were unkind. But it sounds like there is something else you are not saying." Naomi's breath faltered sharply, a quiet gasp escaping her as her eyes widened. He had struck the truth she feared most. Something inside her seemed to collapse then, not in weakness but in exhaustion. Her hands rose to grip the counter behind her, fingers curling tightly against the cool surface, anchoring herself to something solid. She shook her head slightly. "Sir, if I tell you, everything will change." Dominic did not flinch. His voice remained calm, almost warm. "Then let it change." Her lips parted, a fragile tremor running through her, as the truth she had buried for so long pressed at the edge of her voice. She had tried to survive the nights by singing, tried to mend herself in silence, but the secret she carried was growing too heavy to hide behind melodies. And in that quiet room, with a man feared by many standing before her with unexpected patience, Naomi realized she was on the edge of saying the words she had never dared to speak aloud. The moment balanced in the air, delicate and breathless, as she finally whispered, "Sir, there is something you do not know about my brother, and about why I truly left home." Naomi's words trembled in the air, fragile and trembling, and Dominic felt the entire room shift as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. She stood with her fingers gripping the counter behind her, her knuckles pale with tension, her breath uneven. The quiet hum of the machines had faded into nothing. There was only the weight of what she was about to reveal and the steady presence of the man who waited for her to speak. Naomi swallowed hard, her voice barely holding together. "My brother did not simply pass away, sir. What happened to him was not an accident. It was something that should never have happened, something that changed everything in my life." Dominic did not speak. He remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on her with unwavering focus, sensing that the truth she carried had been buried under years of silence. Naomi took a trembling breath. "My brother was 16. He had dreams, simple dreams, good dreams. He wanted to be a musician. He used to hum the same melody I sang tonight. But one night, he came home shaking. He would not eat. He would not speak. And the next morning, he was gone." Naomi paused, as if her breath refused to move past the memory. Dominic felt a cold heaviness settle in his chest. He asked softly what happened that night. Naomi's hands tightened. Someone hurt him. Someone older. Someone who thought no one would believe a child over them. Her voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "My brother tried to tell someone, but they dismissed him. They looked at him like he was causing trouble. They told him to stay quiet, to stop making noise. They made him believe his pain did not matter." Dominic felt an unfamiliar burn in his throat, a quiet fury that rose not from his role as a leader, but from the simple human injustice of what she described. Naomi's eyes filled, her voice barely a whisper. "My brother carried that alone for weeks. He was scared. He was ashamed. And the man who hurt him lived only a few blocks away, walking free, looking at us like he had done nothing wrong." Dominic's expression darkened, but he did not interrupt her. Naomi continued, her words cracking. "After my brother died, I tried to tell people the truth. But they blamed him. They said he must have misunderstood. They said a man like that would never do such a thing. They said my brother was troubled. They said his sadness was his own doing." She shook her head slowly, the grief radiating through her voice. "They made my brother feel like he had no worth. They made him feel invisible. And after he was gone, they made me feel the same." Dominic understood now why her voice carried so much pain, why her songs were filled with ache. He felt an ache in his own chest that surprised him, a tightness he had not felt since he was a child, listening to his mother's soft voice, trying to shield him from the violence in the world beyond their door. Naomi pressed a hand to her chest, her fingers trembling. I left because people saw me as trouble for defending him. They said I needed to move on. They said I talked too much about something that should stay buried. Her breath shuddered as she whispered, I came here because I wanted a place where his memory would not be treated like an inconvenience. A place where the quiet would not punish me for remembering him. Dominic took a long, steady breath, the air thick with emotion. Naomi's truth hit him with a force he did not expect. The kind of grief she carried was not just sorrow. It was betrayal by people who should have protected her. It was the weight of being unheard, unseen, dismissed, and pushed aside. Naomi looked at him with eyes full of fear and exhaustion. That is why I sing, sir. Because it is the only way I can keep him alive without breaking. Dominic stepped closer, not out of obligation, but out of a deep instinct he did not fully understand. He lowered his voice, each word slow and deliberate, heavy with conviction. Naomi, what they did to your brother was not his fault, and the people who made you feel invisible were wrong. Her breath shook, but nothing will ever change what happened. Dominic held her gaze, his eyes steady with a promise she had never heard from anyone else. Naomi, he said quietly, things can change. People can answer for what they have done, and your brother deserved far more than silence. Naomi's chest tightened, her breath catching in disbelief. For the first time, she felt the night shift around her, no longer an empty darkness, but a place where her truth had finally been heard. And standing before her was a man she never expected to understand. A man whose voice carried the quiet certainty that her brother's story was no longer buried in the dark. Naomi's confession settled into the quiet room with a heaviness that neither of them moved to escape. Dominic stood utterly still, his breath deep and controlled, yet inside him something sharp and electric had begun to burn. He had heard countless stories in his life, stories of betrayal, violence, cruelty, and loss. But the way Naomi spoke about her brother, the way grief and love intertwined in her voice, awakened a part of him that had not stirred in many years. The injustice was unbearable, and the silence forced on her, forced on a child, forced on a family with no power, hit him with a force he had not expected. Naomi pressed her trembling hands against the counter behind her, blinking back tears she could no longer hide. Her confession had taken everything out of her, leaving her fragile and exhausted. Her shoulders curved inward, as if she feared she had said too much, as if she feared he would judge her the same way the world had. Dominic's jaw tensed, his hands flexing at his sides. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and steady, but there was a dangerous undertone beneath it. Naomi. She swallowed, her breath trembling. Yes, sir. Tell me the name of the man who hurt your brother. Naomi froze, her eyes widening with fear instead of relief. She stepped forward slightly, shaking her head. Sir, please. I did not tell you this to cause trouble. Dominic's gaze sharpened. Trouble. That man stole your brother's voice. He stole his safety. He stole his peace. And he destroyed your life as well. Naomi shook her head faster now, her voice strained. I am afraid of what might happen if I say more. I am afraid of what you might do. Dominic stepped forward slowly, not threateningly, but with the weight of someone who did not tolerate injustice. Naomi, he said, his voice firm, I am not asking because I want vengeance. I am asking because I want the truth. Naomi lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. She whispered, the truth will not bring my brother back. Dominic paused, the words sinking into him. No, he said softly, it will not. But the truth can stop a man like that from hurting anyone else. Naomi's breath hitched. Fear flickered through her eyes, but something else flickered too. A small, struggling spark of hope she did not yet trust. Dominic continued, his voice low and grounded. That man has lived without consequences for what he did. He has walked freely, while your brother did not get to grow up. And you have lived in fear because no one cared enough to defend him. Naomi looked up, her eyes glossy and filled with disbelief. No one has ever said that to me before. Dominic's expression softened. They should have. Naomi felt the sting of tears rise again, but this time the tears came not from sadness, but from the shock of being defended. Dominic took a slow breath, steadying the fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. He knew he could destroy the man with a single order. He knew he could erase him from the world without leaving a trace. But he also knew that was not what Naomi needed. Not tonight. Not yet. What she needed now was to know that someone finally believed her. Someone finally saw her brother's truth. Someone finally stood on her side. His voice softened. Naomi, you do not have to tell me his name tonight. Or tomorrow. Or ever, if you do not want to. But know this. You are no longer alone in this. Naomi stared at him, stunned by the depth of sincerity in his voice. She had lived years being told to be quiet. Years being told to let go. Years being told her brother's pain did not matter. And now, here was the man the city feared most, speaking to her like her story finally had value. The room felt warm. For the first time, even the small bulb overhead seemed to glow a little softer, as if acknowledging the shift between them. Naomi's voice, quiet but steady, broke the silence. Sir, I do not know if I am ready to say his name, but I am grateful that you asked. Truly grateful. Dominic nodded once, slow and deliberate. Then that is enough for tonight. Naomi's breath trembled with relief, and for the first time since her brother's passing, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Safety. A quiet safety that lived not in walls or doors or locks, but in the presence of someone who finally listened. Dominic watched her as she wiped a tear from her cheek, and in that moment he made a silent vow he did not voice. No matter what the truth was, no matter how dark or how deep it ran, he would not allow her to suffer alone ever again. The small laundry room felt warmer now, not because of the flickering bulb overhead, but because something inside Naomi had finally begun to loosen, like a tightly knotted thread slowly unraveling after years of being pulled in silence. Dominic watched her closely, his expression no longer the unreadable mask he wore for the world, but something quieter, almost human. The truth she had shared had settled between them like dust on still air, fragile and sacred, something neither of them seemed willing to disturb with sudden movement. Naomi drew in a long, shaky breath, her chest rising and falling unevenly. She had expected many things when she confessed the truth about her brother. She had expected disbelief. She had expected dismissal. She had expected the cold indifference she had grown accustomed to from people who thought her pain was inconvenient. She had never expected understanding. And she certainly had never expected Dominic Castellano, the man whispered about in fearful tones across the city, to look at her with something resembling empathy. Dominic's voice broke the silence, low and steady. Naomi, you said your brother used to hum that melody. She nodded slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the counter behind her. Yes, sir. He hummed it whenever he felt safe. It reminded him of home, even when the world outside felt too heavy for him. Dominic's jaw tightened at the word safe. It was a word he did not use lightly. He associated it with locked doors, armed guards, and the cold comfort of control. Yet the way Naomi spoke, it carried softness, warmth, something he had not felt since he was a boy listening to his mother's quiet humming after long, violent nights. Dominic stepped closer, careful and slow, stopping a few feet away from her. Tell me what he was like. Naomi blinked, startled. No one had ever asked her that before. People only wanted to know about his death, never about his life. He was bright, she whispered, the faintest smile tugging at her lips despite her tears. He found joy in the smallest things. He used to drum his fingers on the kitchen table like he was playing an invisible piano. He laughed even on days when he had nothing. Her voice cracked, a tear sliding down her cheek. He loved music more than anything. But after that night, everything changed. He stopped humming. He stopped smiling. And no one saw him fading except me. Dominic listened in complete silence, his eyes fixed on her with a depth she did not understand. He imagined a boy robbed of his innocence, ignored by the adults who were supposed to protect him. He imagined Naomi watching helplessly as her brother's spirit withered under the cruelty of someone who walked freely without consequence. A deep, simmering anger swelled inside him, slow and dangerous. He had seen monsters in many forms, but the kind that preyed on the vulnerable was the one he despised most. Naomi wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, trying to steady herself. After he died, I tried to talk about him. I tried to keep his memory alive. But people acted like his story was inconvenient, like grief had an expiration date. She shook her head, her shoulders trembling. I kept humming that melody because it was the only thing that made me feel like he was still with me. Dominic's gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. You have carried this alone for far too long. Naomi looked up, her eyes searching his. I did not have anyone else. I thought if I kept my head down and stayed quiet, the world would leave me alone. Dominic exhaled slowly, the sound more emotional than he intended. Then he spoke, his tone low but certain. Naomi, you are not meant to live in silence. And you are not meant to grieve alone. She inhaled sharply, her breath trembling at the certainty in his words. Dominic took one step closer, his presence grounding, steady, unexpectedly gentle. And your brother, he continued, deserved to be remembered for who he was, not for what someone took from him. Naomi's eyes glistened, the grief in them raw but no longer solitary. She whispered, Sir, I do not know why you care. The question lingered in the air, simple yet profound. Dominic hesitated, his voice quieter than before, carrying a truth he rarely gave to anyone. Because I know what it is like to lose someone, and have the world move on as if nothing happened. Naomi's breath caught. Dominic looked at her, his expression no longer hard, no longer guarded, but touched by a sadness she had never expected to see in him. I know what it is like to feel unseen, he said softly. Naomi's heart tightened painfully, understanding him in a way she had not anticipated. And for a moment, the two of them stood there, bound not by power or fear, but by the shared ache of loss. Two souls shaped by grief in different ways, now standing in the same fragile light. The night around them remained deep and still, but something within it had undeniably changed. Naomi no longer stood alone in the quiet, and Dominic, for reasons he did not yet understand, had taken a step into her darkness, not to command it, but to share its weight. Dominic stood very still, the weight of Naomi's story settling into him like a cold stone sinking to the bottom of deep water. The dim laundry room felt smaller now, its warm yellow light wrapping around them as if trying to soften the heaviness in the air. Naomi wiped a tear from her cheek, her breathing unsteady, but there was something gentler in her expression now, a shift that came from finally being heard. Dominic watched her with a quiet intensity, his jaw set, his eyes darkening with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to feel. Anger. Not the explosive kind he used to control a room or command his men, but a deep, simmering anger born from empathy. From recognizing a pain, he understood more than he had expected. Naomi, he said quietly, his voice steady but threaded with something heavier. When you sing for your brother, it is not just grief you carry. It is love. Naomi let out a trembling breath, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. He loved music more than anything, she whispered. And after everything that happened, I feel like I owe it to him to keep that little piece of him alive. Dominic nodded slowly. That melody you sang, he said, it sounded familiar to me. Naomi looked up at him, confusion flickering through her eyes. You have heard it before. Dominic hesitated for a moment, the truth touching a place inside him that had been closed for many years. My mother used to hum something similar when I was a boy. She said it helped her stay calm when things in the house were difficult. Naomi's breath hitched softly. She looked at him with new understanding, recognizing in his voice a quiet echo of his own childhood pain. Dominic continued, his tone lower. When you sang, it reminded me of her. It reminded me of being young and clinging to something gentle while everything around me felt impossible. Naomi felt her chest tighten. She had not expected him to share anything personal, especially not something that made him vulnerable. She whispered, I did not know. Dominic's gaze softened. Neither did I. Not until tonight. The room grew quiet again, but it was not the cold, suffocating silence Naomi feared. It was warm, fragile, a silence that held space for both of their truths. Naomi finally found the courage to speak again. Sir, she said softly, I am grateful you listened. More than you know. Dominic stepped closer, but slowly, making sure she had time to adjust to his presence. You trusted me with your truth, he said, and I do not take that lightly. Naomi's eyes lowered, her voice trembling. I have not told anyone the whole story before. Not even the people I lived with after my brother passed. They always told me to move on. They said remembering him was holding me back. Dominic's expression hardened, not at her, but at the cruelty of a world that demanded silence from those already hurting. People often try to make grief smaller because they cannot bear to face it, he said quietly. But that does not mean they are right. Naomi looked up, her eyes shining with disbelief and fragile relief. He said gently, "Your brother mattered. His pain mattered. And your memories of him matter." Naomi's breath broke. She pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. Dominic lowered his voice even more. "And you deserve to heal in a way that does not erase him." Naomi closed her eyes, letting a tear slip down her cheek. For the first time, the memory of her brother did not feel like a weight dragging her under. It felt like something shared, something seen, something understood. She opened her eyes again, her voice barely audible. "Sir, you do not know what this means to me." Dominic looked at her with unexpected softness. "I know what it feels like to lose someone and have no one speak their name." Naomi's breath caught. She recognized that grief in him now, in the tightness behind his words, in the shadows lingering in his eyes. She whispered, "Who did you lose?" Dominic's chest rose with a long, slow breath. He looked away for a moment, as if deciding whether to open a door he had kept locked for decades. Then he spoke, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "My mother." Naomi's eyes widened with sympathy. Dominic continued, "She was the only softness in my life. And when she died, no one wanted to talk about her. The world moved on as if she had never existed." Naomi's heart ached for him. She stepped forward instinctively, the distance between them closing not from courage, but from shared loss. Dominic met her gaze again, his voice steady. "So when you sing for your brother, when you remember him, I understand more than you think." Naomi felt a warmth rise through her chest, gentle and profound. In that quiet laundry room, grief did not feel like an ending anymore. It felt like the beginning of two people finally being seen. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone in the dark. The air in the small laundry room felt different now, as if the walls themselves had absorbed every word Dominic and Naomi had shared. The dim light overhead cast a soft glow across their faces, illuminating the quiet understanding that had settled between them. Naomi stood with her hands gently clasped, no longer gripping the counter for support, but holding herself more steadily than she had since the conversation began. Dominic remained only a few feet away, his posture relaxed in a way rarely seen, his expression open, softened by the vulnerability he had just revealed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was no longer heavy. It felt like a breath held between two people who had just acknowledged parts of themselves the world had never cared to see. Finally, Dominic broke the silence with a voice that carried the weight of a decision already forming inside him. "Naomi," he said quietly, "you should not be working alone at night." Naomi blinked, startled. "Sir, I prefer the night shift. It is quieter." Dominic shook his head once, slow and firm. "Too quiet." Naomi hesitated, unsure how to respond. She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I have managed on my own for a long time. I am used to the quiet." Dominic stepped a little closer, his tone gentle but resolute. "Being used to something does not mean it is good for you." The words landed deeper than she expected. Naomi swallowed, her breath catching. "I do not want to be a burden," she murmured, "and I do not want to cause trouble by asking for more than I deserve." Dominic's expression tightened, as if her words struck a nerve. He shook his head again, his voice carrying more emotion now. "Naomi, you have spent your entire life believing you deserve less than others. That ends now." Naomi's eyes widened, her breath faltering. Dominic continued, his voice steady. "You deserve rest. You deserve safety. You deserve to work in a place where your pain is not dismissed or ignored. And you deserve to be surrounded by people who see your worth." Naomi felt her vision blur again, but this time her tears came from a warmth she could not contain. "Sir," she whispered, "no one has ever said that to me." Dominic's expression softened even further. "Then it is long overdue." Naomi took a slow, shaky breath, grounding herself in the sincerity of his words. She looked at him with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "What do you want me to do?" Dominic thought for a moment before answering, his tone calm but decisive. "I want you to move to the day rotation, a quieter position, away from heavy tasks. And I want you to have evenings free, time to actually rest." Naomi stared at him, surprised. "But the night shift pays more," she said softly. "And I need the extra money." Dominic held her gaze with unwavering seriousness. "I will adjust your pay. You will receive the same amount, if not more." Naomi's breath caught, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Sir, I cannot accept special treatment." Dominic stepped closer, his presence grounding her. "This is not special treatment. This is correction. You have carried too much for too long, and I cannot let you continue to break yourself just to survive." Naomi trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this for me?" Dominic did not look away. "Because you deserve better than what life has given you, and because no one should have to rebuild themselves alone." Naomi felt her chest tighten, a deep warmth spreading through her, soft and overwhelming. She had never been spoken to this way, never been cared for so plainly, so sincerely. For once, she allowed herself to believe it. Dominic's voice softened even more. "And there is something else." Naomi lifted her eyes slowly, waiting. Dominic held her gaze with quiet intensity. "If singing brings you peace, then I want you to keep singing. Not in the dark, not in hiding, but when you want to, without fear." Naomi's breath broke, and a tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it gently, overwhelmed. "Sir, I do not know what to say." Dominic gave a faint, rare smile. "Then do not say anything yet. Just allow yourself the chance to heal." Naomi nodded slowly, her heart full, her voice trembling with gratitude she could barely contain. And for the first time in years, she felt the night shift inside her, not as a weight pulling her down, but as a quiet moment where hope finally entered the room. Dominic watched her with a steady, protective gaze. He had made his decision. Naomi would not face her grief alone anymore. Not in his house, not under his roof. And as the soft hum of the machines returned to the room, the night no longer felt cold. It felt new, like something fragile but alive had just begun to take shape between them. The quiet of the laundry room settled over them like a soft blanket, no longer heavy with grief, but filled with something calmer, something almost warm. Naomi stood still, her breath steadying little by little, as if her heart was finally learning what it felt like to rest. Dominic watched her with a gaze that carried no pressure, only presence, the kind of presence that allowed a person to breathe without fear of breaking. The hum of the machines softened into the background. The night felt gentler, no longer a dark weight pressing against Naomi's chest. She lifted her eyes slowly, meeting Dominic's steady gaze. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. Her voice trembled with sincerity. "For listening, for believing me, for seeing my brother." Dominic nodded once, slow and meaningful. His tone was low, carried by a conviction that did not waver. "Your brother deserved to be remembered with love, not silence. And you deserve to be protected long before you ever walked into this house." Naomi let out a shaky breath, her eyes warming with emotion. "Sir, I do not know how to repay what you have done for me tonight." Dominic stepped closer, his voice firm, yet surprisingly gentle. "You owe me nothing. All I ask is that you allow yourself the chance to heal. That is enough." Naomi pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his words. She had spent years fighting to keep herself from disappearing under grief. Tonight, for the first time, she felt the weight lift. Dominic glanced around the room, then back at her. "It is late," he said quietly. "You should rest." Naomi nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." Dominic turned slightly, as if preparing to leave, but paused at the doorway. "Naomi," he said without looking back, "when you sang earlier, it did something to this house." Naomi blinked, surprised. "What do you mean, sir?" Dominic exhaled softly, his tone sincere. "This house is full of shadows, full of ghosts from the past. But your voice brought something different. Something I had forgotten existed here." Naomi waited, her breath soft. Dominic finished, "It brought peace." Naomi felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time they were gentle, not painful. A quiet warmth flooded her chest, as if the memory of her brother had finally been held with tenderness instead of sorrow. Dominic stepped into the hallway, but before he disappeared around the corner, he said one final thing. "If you ever feel the quiet becoming too heavy again, do not face it alone." Naomi clasped her hands at her heart, her voice trembling with emotion. "I will remember that, sir." When Dominic was gone, Naomi stood in the stillness of the laundry room for a long moment. She listened to the hum of the machines, the faint echo of her own heartbeat, and the lingering softness of everything he had said. For the first time in years, she did not feel like a shadow in someone else's home. She felt present, seen, safe. She reached slowly for the folded linens, her fingers brushing the fabric not with heaviness, but with a quiet steadiness she had not felt in a long time. She let a gentle melody rise in her chest, not out of pain this time, but out of gratitude. The same melody her brother had once hummed when the world still felt full of possibility. She closed her eyes, letting her voice drift softly through the room. The notes wrapped around her like a warm embrace, filling the space with something that felt like light. And as the final note faded into the stillness, Naomi felt something she never thought she would feel again. Hope. In another wing of the mansion, Dominic paused in the hallway, listening. He recognized the melody now, not because of memory, but because of what it represented. Healing, strength, humanity. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, letting the sound wash over him. It was fragile. It was beautiful. It was enough. And that night, in a house built on fear and silence, two souls who had carried their grief alone finally found something worth holding on to. And the world remembered what dignity looks like.